there is evidence that Jack Ruby snuck into the police basement where he shot Oswald by means of a ruse involving him pretending to be part of a television camera crew. And this is not some wacky theory by an amateur sleuth or a conspiracy theorist. This was a theory that was born on the day it happened, a theory of a police officer. And I'm going to start here with Detective Cutshaw because he gives a very good description of the people he saw pushing the camera. At the time that Oswald was being brought down the jail, I was stationed next to the door leading to the jail office. Prior to Oswald coming out, a TV camera was pushed out of the basement lobby into the basement. There were 3 men pushing the camera. The man with the green shirt was on the right. The man with the black raincoat was on the left. The third person was in the center and had on a dark suit. He was bent over low behind the camera, pushing on the base. The camera was pushed down the ramp into the parking area, but was not hooked up. After the shooting, the camera was being pushed up the ramp by 2 men. The man in the dark suit was not one of them. I stopped the 2 men and asked them where the other man was that helped them push the camera out. They stated that no one was with them. And we have film of the camera being pushed out. We don't have the full course photographed. This is what we see is after Cutshaw first saw it. But we have part of it, and here you see the man in the middle there raised his hand. He's one of the people pushing this camera. And the other person we can see here is on the right, that guy who's standing straight up as he's walking, who looks that way. So we only see 2 people in this film. Apparently one of the people Cutshaw saw originally pushing the camera was no longer pushing it. Now he describes a man in a dark suit, a man in a raincoat, and a man in a green shirt. That guy standing up on the right, where he said he was, if you're facing them anyway, that man has to be the guy with the green shirt because he's not wearing a dark suit and he's not wearing a raincoat. So that's green shirt man standing up, and we got somebody crouching behind who I think is dark suit man, not raincoat man. I think raincoat man left the camera before it entered the view of the camera taking this film. And my interpretation is consistent with what Cutshaw said on the day it happened. That is that the man in the dark suit was the man who was crouching down low. And Detective Lowry, who was also in the basement, tells the same story. He mentions it's a Channel 5 television camera, and that's what this is in the film. Lowry's the one who came up with the theory that this is how Jack Ruby snuck in the basement. Lowry advised he was of the opinion Jack Leon Ruby probably entered pertinent area under the pretext of being with the above-mentioned Channel 5 television newsmen. So the implication here would have to be that if this is correct, that Jack Ruby is the man in the dark suit who is crouching, presumably crouching, so that he will not be recognized or filmed by the other camera. So the idea is that the crouching, waving man is Jack Ruby. And why is he waving, we might wonder. Maybe he's a silly, wacko-mashuga Jew with guts who's just waving at some friend who knows he's supposed to be there or not, I don't know. But is this Jack Ruby? That's the question. Well, if we examine as best we can with the image quality here, it seems to be consistent, except this person is not wearing a hat, but he's got a hairline which is similar to Jack Ruby's, and he's wearing a dark suit as Jack Ruby was. So the film is not inconsistent with the theory that that's Jack Ruby. And as Mr. Griffin of the Warren Commission reveals, they were aware of this, they were aware of the film, and they ask a pertinent question. Now you say this guy had on a dark suit? Right. Do you recall if he had on a hat? So obviously Griffin has seen this film and he knows the guy wasn't wearing a hat. But Cutshaw says, "I do not, because the man I saw was bent over pushing like that. All three is what struck me strange. All three of them. Not one was putting all his weight, but all three were bent over pushing like that." So he's not able to trip up Cutshaw on the hat issue. And we should keep in mind that Cutshaw did not have the same perspective we have in the film. He was not located where that camera was, and he saw them at an earlier point when they were pushing. So we shouldn't expect what we see in the film to match exactly what he saw, because he saw it at a different time from a different perspective. Now, maybe the question of the hairline can be explored here. This looks like a man who might be bald completely on top and have hair on his sides. But if you look around at pictures of Jack Ruby, that's the way he looks sometimes, and sometimes he looks like he has almost a full head of hair. And the reason is because of his comb over, and because of lighting conditions, and because of camera angles. Here we get a pretty good look, I think, at what the real situation is. He's got that tuft in the middle that's forward, and he lets that grow long, and he combs it back. But he is almost completely bald on the top of his head, except for that tuft. And if you cut that tuft, at an inch or two for each hair, he would look bald with a funny little spot in the front. So I think what we see in the film is consistent with Jack Ruby's hair situation as can be determined in other photography. Now, according to Cutshaw's account, this is another account he gave with more details, he was very diligent in his task. He followed these camera people. He got their names. He reported them to his superiors. And I've mentioned also on the side here, the man in the dark suit did not return with the camera. So this man that we think might be Ruby didn't come out of the basement the way he came in. He says, Cutshaw says, that he later learned, after they had been, after the cameramen had been interviewed, that one of their names was Alexander. However, Alexander is not mentioned by the camera crew. Tankersley and Timmins are said to be the camera crew, and Alexander's name just doesn't come up when they are talked to. This shows that not all of the investigators were as diligent as Cutshaw, because even though they have the name Alexander, apparently they never ask anybody about it. And in an FBI report here, the name is identified as John Alexander, and I have this marked out to have been initialed by Hubert of the Warren Commission, just to demonstrate that the Warren Commission, at least in the person of Mr. Hubert, was aware of this John Alexander character. But of course, John Alexander's name was not mentioned in the Warren Commission volumes, except in the documents here, the interview documents. But the Warren Commission apparently never looked into this John Alexander thing. And here, oddly, Gerald Hill was called in to investigate here. Sergeant Gerald Hill, whom I talk about in other places. He interviewed the police officers who witnessed the camera incident. And talking of them, I think he means Cutshaw here, he stated that they were of the opinion that possibly Ruby was one of the individuals who had accompanied the camera into the area and had made his move from this position. He said that he had contacted a man by the name of Timon, first name unknown. We later find out this is Timmons, the name, and the sound engineer for the Channel 5 camera, who told him that the other individual assigned to the camera with him was one John Alexander. So the internal police department investigation is aware of a John Alexander, and that he, Timon, recalled no other individual assisting them in placing the camera in the location before the fatal shot. Timon, it said very possibly that someone else was present and immediately behind them. He stated that he had no opportunity to speak with Alexander. He stated, okay, when he's saying he here, I think he's referring to Cutshaw. He's not referring to Timon, I don't think, because We have other interviews with Timmons, and Timmons doesn't mention John Alexander, and he's not asked either. So the Dallas police were aware of this. And it should be noted that the name Alexander does appear elsewhere in this story. Assistant District Attorney William Alexander. He was active on the day of the assassination. He was at the Texas School Book Depository, and then he went to Oak Cliff. And he was also, it should be noted, he had a permanent pass card to the Carousel Club. That's Jack Ruby's club. And here is a list of people who had such permanent passes. And you can see, well, Ray Hawkins is on there. Sam Campisi is on there. And William F. Alexander is on there. And this is not a disputed fact. Alexander was asked about this. And I think he said he never used it or something, and it was just something that Ruby took the initiative and gave it to him, but he never asked for it or used it. I think that's his story. But I don't want to get too far off the beaten path here. Alexander, of course, is a common name, but we have Alexander apparently given as one of the name of the cameramen, and apparently it wasn't really one of the name of the cameramen. So perhaps, if that was Ruby, perhaps he just made up the name John Alexander, and there is no John Alexander. But we will never know, will we? And another name that appears in this stuff is Timmons as one of the cameramen. Timmons is an extremely uncommon name. And there happens to be another one associated with Jack Ruby, a Timmons, a Monty Timmons. A secretary to Jack Ruby, according to this. Two of these camera people names appear in Jack Ruby's hit list, or on his lists of names that he associates with. And with Alexander, it's a very common name, but Timmons is very unusual. I was not able to determine that this Monty Timmons was related to the other Timmons, but I think it's likely. Now, the alleged cameramen, Tankersley and Timmons, were interviewed by the FBI. Of course, they did not say that Jack Ruby was helping them with the camera. But Tankersley said, as did everybody else who knew, that this camera was not even used. The camera that he was pushing in was not used. And yet there is film of Oswald being shot attributed to John Tankersley. So apparently Tankersley was in the basement and he was with a camera that was working. So I think what happened here is that he was enlisted to be one of the people pushing this camera when he really wasn't. He was really at some other camera that filmed Oswald getting shot. So maybe John Alexander was a real person pushing the camera. Maybe he worked for WBAP. But maybe they couldn't identify him in the evidence because maybe he was related to William Alexander, the assistant DA, and that would look kind of funny. And this is the Timmons FBI interview. He gives the same story that Tankersley gives. And a James Turner here, another employee of the TV station, says that he rushed over to help Tankersley and Timmons with the camera. But according to the way he tells the story here, it looks like he should be visible in this film, that he would be back where the other cameras are, and that to be helping them with this camera the way he says, he would have to have been doing it during this film we see, but nobody does in this film what he says he does. So I think this is another person who was enlisted to try to explain away the missing cameraman. And the Warren Commission dismisses this credible evidence with its usual bullshit sort of explanation. Well, I think it really was Jack Ruby. I think that's how he got in, and I think they don't want to say that's how he got in because it shows he had help getting in. And when you have help getting in to kill somebody, you have a conspiracy. And we don't want any conspiracy here, do we?